Imagine building a perfect life piece by piece only to watch it crumble in a single night in front of everyone you know. That is exactly what happened to Michael Sullivan. He thought he was the king of his world with a loyal wife and a thriving empire. But at his biggest celebration, his wife, Victoria, didn't just leave him. She humiliated him by walking out with a young, famous baseball star. It looks like a classic case of a cheating wife destroying a good man. But is it? If you enjoy stories about complex relationships, hidden secrets, and the real price of ambition, please hit that subscribe button. We explore the darker side of love every week. Now get comfortable, because what looked like a betrayal might actually be justice. Let's begin.
The sound of a marriage ending isn't always a scream. Sometimes it's the soft, terrifying click of a designer heel turning away from you on a marble floor. One minute I was holding a crystal flute toasting to 10 years of Sullivan Construction's dominance over the Chicago skyline. The next, I was watching the back of my wife's emerald dress disappear through the double doors, her hand firmly interlaced with the calloused fingers of the city's most notorious baseball pitcher. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and filled with the eyes of 300 people watching my heart get ripped out. If you crave stories where the line between love and hate blurs, where secrets are currency and every betrayal has a price, stay with me. We are just peeling back the first layer. The champagne in my glass was a vintage older than the waitstaff serving it. I held it up to the light of the crystal chandeliers, admiring the golden hue, feeling the weight of the crystal stem between my fingers. It was a perfect weight. Everything tonight was perfect. To 10 years, I said, my voice amplified by the microphone booming across the hushed crowd gathered in the main hall of the Sapphire Lounge. To building a legacy that outlasts us all. A ripple of applause moved through the room. Bankers, politicians, competitors I had crushed and then invited just to witness my victory. I smiled, the practiced, charming grin that had closed million-dollar deals on handshakes alone. I looked to the front row, to the reserved table where my wife Victoria sat. She was supposed to be there. The chair was empty. The velvet cushion was uncompressed, the napkin folded into a pristine swan, untouched. My smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a glitch in the program before I recovered. I scanned the room, keeping the panic out of my eyes. Victoria was never late. She was the curator of my image, the woman who color-coordinated her jewelry with my ties. She was discipline personified. Then I saw the flash of emerald green near the exit. It was her dress. A custom silk number that clung to her silhouette like a second skin, backless and daring. But she wasn't walking toward the stage to join me. She was walking toward the double mahogany doors. And she wasn't alone. A man was guiding her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The hand was large, the wrist adorned with a platinum watch that caught the strobe lights. I didn't need to see his face to know the swagger. The broad shoulders, the tailored suit that struggled to contain athletic bulk, the arrogance in the stride. Chase Rivers, the Chicago Cubs starting pitcher. The man whose face was plastered on billboards I drove past every morning. A man 20 years my junior, who played games for a living while I built cities. Victoria, I said. I hadn't meant to say it into the microphone, but the acoustics were unforgiving. The feedback whine cut through the room. The applause died instantly. The silence that rushed in was violent. 300 heads turned. They looked at me, then they followed my gaze to the door. At the sound of her name, Victoria stopped. She didn't turn around. She didn't look at me with guilt or fear. She simply paused, her hand tightening around Chase's arm. Chase looked back, locking eyes with me across the expanse of the ballroom. He didn't smirk. He didn't look sorry. He looked at me with a profound, pitying indifference. Then he pushed the door open. The sounds of the city outside sirens whined. The chaotic life of Chicago burst into the climate-controlled perfection of my gala. Victoria stepped through the threshold, her emerald dress trailing behind her like green fire. The door swung shut. The thud echoed like a gavel striking a sound block. I stood alone on the stage, the microphone slick in my sweating palm. The band had stopped playing. A waiter dropped a tray of glasses, the shatter of crystal piercing the suffocating quiet. My chest constricted, a physical blow that knocked the wind out of me. It wasn't just that she had left. It was the theater of it. She hadn't slipped away quietly. She had waited for the toast. She had waited until every eye was on me, until I was at the very peak of my mountain, to push me off. I looked down at my hand. The wedding ring, a simple platinum band I'd worn for a decade, felt suddenly heavy like a shackle. The murmurs started, low at first, then rising like a tide. I could hear them. "Did you see that? Was that Rivers? Oh my God, poor Michael. Poor Michael." The rage ignited, then hot and white and blinding. I wasn't poor Michael. I was Michael Sullivan. I owned this building. I owned this night. I gripped the microphone stand until my knuckles turned white. I had to salvage this. I had to spin this. But as I opened my mouth to speak, to make a joke, to dismiss it as a misunderstanding, I realized my throat had closed up. For the first time in my life, I had lost control of the narrative. The morning sun hitting the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like an interrogation lamp. I hadn't slept. I had spent the last 6 hours sitting on the edge of our Italian leather sofa, staring at a muted television screen. The news cycle moves fast, but scandal moves faster. The footage of Victoria walking out of the Sapphire Lounge was already looping on the local news, but it was the internet that was truly dissecting me. I unlocked my phone. My notifications were a solid block of text, a wall of noise I couldn't climb over. On Twitter, #TheWalkout was trending #1 in Chicago. I tapped the first video. It was a shaky cell phone angle from someone at table 12. In the grainy footage, I looked small. That was the worst part. I stood on that stage, microphone in hand, looking like a lost child, while my wife glided away like royalty. The comments below were a digital autopsy of my masculinity. She didn't just leave him, she evicted him from his own life. "Look at Rivers. That's a man who knows he won." Sullivan looks like he's about to cry. "Money can't buy loyalty, Mike." I threw the phone onto the cushion beside me. It bounced silently. This apartment, usually a sanctuary of high-altitude silence, now felt like a mausoleum. It was too clean, too curated. Victoria's touch was everywhere. The specific shade of cream on the walls, the placement of the abstract sculptures, the scent of white tea and thyme that lingered in the air. She had designed the stage, and then she had burned the theater down. My personal line rang. It was Brian Cooper, my PR crisis manager. He was the only person I had allowed to ring through. "Don't talk," Brian said the moment I answered. "Don't tweet. Don't post a cryptic quote on Instagram. Do not leave the building." "I look like a fool, Brian," I rasped. My voice sounded wrecked, unfamiliar. "They're laughing at me. Chase Rivers is walking around town with my wife, and I'm a meme." "No," Brian corrected, his voice sharp and clinical. "You are a victim. And right now, victims poll very well. You are the hard-working titan of industry who built this city, and she is the ungrateful trophy wife running off with a Playboy athlete. That is the narrative, Michael. If you get angry, you look like a tyrant. If you stay quiet, you look dignified. We let her be the villain. I don't want to be the victim, I snapped, standing up and pacing the length of the living room. I want to bury them. You will, Brian promised. But not today. Today you bleed. Let the public see the blood. It makes the comeback story better. He hung up. I stood in the center of the living room, the silence rushing back in. Playing the victim went against every instinct I had. I was a builder. I imposed my will on steel and concrete. I didn't wait for sympathy. I picked up the phone again. My thumb hovered over her name. Victoria. I knew I shouldn't call. It was weak. It was exactly what she expected. But the need to hear her voice, even just to scream at her, was a physical ache in my chest. I pressed call. It rang once, twice, 3 times. You have reached the voicemail of Victoria Sterling. Please leave a message. Her voice was cool, professional, utterly detached. It was the voice of the woman who hosted charity galas and charmed my investors. It wasn't the voice of a woman who had just nuked a 10-year marriage. I didn't leave a message. I couldn't. What was there to say? Why was it the age difference? Was it the boredom? I walked into the master bedroom. Her side of the bed was made pristine, untouched. On the vanity, her jewelry box was open. I looked inside. The diamond studs I gave her for her 30th birthday were there. The sapphire pendant from our trip to Capri. She hadn't taken the jewelry. She hadn't taken the clothes. She hadn't taken anything that I had bought her. That was when the real fear set in. If she had cleared out the bank accounts or taken the diamonds, I would have understood. That was a transaction. That was greed. But leaving it all behind, that meant she didn't want my money. She just wanted out. And a woman who doesn't want anything from you is the most dangerous enemy of all, because you have absolutely no leverage to stop her. The silence in the penthouse wasn't peaceful. It was acoustic. In a space this large, designed with limestone floors and floor-to-ceiling glass, sound didn't dissipate. It bounced. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant wail of a siren on Michigan Avenue, the sound of my own footsteps, it all echoed, amplifying the emptiness. I wandered through the rooms like a ghost, haunting my own life. For 10 years, I had treated this apartment as a trophy case. It was featured in Architectural Digest. It was the envy of every dinner guest we ever hosted. But walking through it, now stripped of the social performance, I realized it didn't look like a home. It looked like a hotel lobby. There were no stray magazines, no unwashed coffee cups, no throw blankets crumpled on the sofa. Victoria had kept it perfect, because perfection was the only language I spoke. I found myself drifting toward the master suite, specifically the walk-in closet. It was a room in itself, climate-controlled and lined with cedar. I pushed the door open, and the automatic lights flickered on, illuminating rows of designer garments organized by color. I ran my hand along a row of silk blouses. Saint Laurent, Gucci, Prada. I knew the labels because I had paid the credit card bills, but as I touched the fabric, a cold realization settled in my gut. I couldn't remember a single time she had looked comfortable in any of this. I had bought her an image. I had dressed her like a doll to stand next to me at ribbon cuttings and board dinners, ensuring she complemented the aesthetic of Sullivan Construction. Did she even like green? The dress she wore last night was emerald. I had told her once, years ago, that green brought out her eyes. Had she worn it for me, or was it a final ironic costume? My gaze drifted to the center island of the closet, a marble-topped dresser where she laid out her accessories. That was when I saw it. Sitting on the cool gray marble next to a crystal tray was a long black velvet box. The lid was open. I walked over, my breath catching in my throat. Inside lay the diamond tennis bracelet. 10 carats. Platinum setting. It was the 10-year anniversary gift I had presented to her 3 days ago over a private dinner at Alinea. It had cost more than my father's first house. When I gave it to her, she had smiled that practiced, terrifyingly perfect smile and kissed my cheek. She had said it was beautiful. She hadn't worn it. At the gala, I had been so busy shaking hands, checking the lighting, and worrying about the microphone feedback that I hadn't even looked at her wrists. I had assumed she was wearing my badge of ownership, but she had left it here. Open. Visible. It was a message clearer than any note she could have written. I don't want your money. I don't want your status. I don't want your diamonds. I picked up the bracelet. The stones were cold, heavy. They sparkled under the LED lights, mocking me. To Victoria, this wasn't a gift. It was severance pay she had refused to accept. I squeezed the bracelet in my fist, the diamonds digging into my palm until it hurt. The pain was grounding. It cut through the shock and the numbness. Brian was wrong. I couldn't play the victim. Victims are helpless. Victims sit in empty houses and wonder what went wrong. I wasn't going to sit here and mourn a woman who treated my decade of devotion like a prison sentence. She wanted a war. She wanted to humiliate me publicly with a boy who threw balls for a living. I dropped the bracelet back into the box with a sharp clack. I turned around and walked out of the closet, the echo of my footsteps sounding different now. Harder, faster. If she didn't want the diamonds, fine. I would find out what she did want, and then I would make sure she never got it. I walked to my study and booted up my private server. It was time to stop grieving and start hunting. I didn't go to the office to work. I went to the office to war. By noon, I had mobilized every resource at my disposal. I had private investigators pulling Chase Rivers's financial records, looking for gambling debts. Steroid use, illegitimate children, anything that could be weaponized. I had my legal team drafting a scorched earth divorce petition that would freeze Victoria's assets so fast she wouldn't be able to buy a cup of coffee in this city. But paperwork wasn't enough. I needed to see him. I needed to look the man who stole my life in the eye and remind him that while he played games for a living, I owned the stadium he played in. My contact at the Cubs front office, a man who owed me a favor for zoning permits on his lake house, told me Chase was at Wrigley Field for a private bullpen session. I drove myself. No driver, no security. The Aston Martin tore down Lakeshore Drive, the engine growling in sync with the anger simmering in my gut. I parked in the VIP lot and walked through the player's entrance, flashing my credentials. Security didn't stop me. In Chicago, the name Sullivan opened doors even when they were locked. The stadium was empty, a cathedral of steel and ivy waiting for the faithful. The silence was different here than in my penthouse. It was expectant. I walked down the tunnel and out onto the field. The smell of cut grass and clay hit me instantly. Far out in the bullpen, I heard the rhythmic thwack of a ball hitting leather. Chase Rivers was alone, shirtless, under the afternoon sun, throwing pitches into a net target. He was younger than he looked on TV. Pure muscle and kinetic energy, his motion fluid and violent. He wound up and unleashed a fastball that hit the target with a sound like a gunshot. "Impressive," I said, my voice echoing off the empty stands. "But you're missing an audience." Chase didn't flinch. He caught the rebound ball, rolled it in his hand, and turned slowly. He looked at me, squinting against the sun. He didn't look surprised. He looked bored. "Sullivan," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. "I figured you'd show up. Usually guys like you send lawyers first." I don't need lawyers to deal with a child, I said, stepping onto the dirt. I stayed in my suit, a deliberate choice. I wanted the contrast. I wanted him to see the difference between labor and power. I'm here to give you one chance, Chase. You're going to issue a statement saying you made a mistake. You're going to say you were drunk or confused, and you're going to apologize to my wife publicly. Chase laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. And if I don't, then I bury you, I said, my voice dropping to a low, calm register. I know the owners of this team. I know the sponsors who put your face on cereal boxes. I will make you toxic. By the time I'm done, you won't be pitching in the major leagues. You'll be lucky to play semi-pro in Japan. I waited for the fear. I waited for the realization to dawn in his eyes that he had messed with the wrong man. Instead, he just shook his head and spit into the dirt. You really don't get it, do you? Chase said, walking closer. He stopped 3 feet from me. He smelled of sweat and rosin. You think this is about me? You think I seduced her? You think I lured her away from her happy home? I saw you holding her hand, I snapped. I was holding her up, Chase corrected. Because she's been carrying the weight of your bullshit for 5 years, and she was tired. Watch your mouth, I warned, stepping forward. She didn't leave you for me, Michael, Chase said, his voice dropping the mockery. He looked at me with a strange intensity, almost like pity. I'm just the exit strategy. She could have left with the janitor, and she would have been happier. You know nothing about my marriage, I hissed. I know enough, Chase said. He turned his back on me, walking back to the mound. He picked up another ball. I know why she stayed, and I know why she finally left. He wound up, preparing to throw. What are you talking about? I demanded. Chase paused mid-windup. He looked over his shoulder. Go home, Michael. Go into that fancy office of hers. Dig through the bottom drawer of her desk, the locked one. What's in the desk? Chase threw the ball. It slammed into the net with a deafening crack. Ask her about the architect, he said. The drive back to the Meridian was a blur of red lights and aggressive lane changes. Chase's words were a poison looping in my mind. Ask her about the architect. It didn't make sense. I was the architect. I was the one who designed the skyline. Unless... My stomach turned over. A cold, heavy stone of dread settled in my gut, older and deeper than the anger I'd been nursing for 24 hours. I stormed into the penthouse, ignoring the panoramic view of the city I usually paused to admire. I went straight to the end of the hallway, to the room Victoria called her sanctuary. It was a small study, elegant and understated, where she managed the household accounts and her charity work. I rarely entered it. It was her space, and I had always respected that boundary, mostly because I didn't care about the minutiae of her day. Now I tore the door open. The room smelled of her jasmine and old paper. Her mahogany desk sat in the center, pristine and organized. I walked around to the chair, the leather creaking as I sat down. It felt wrong, like sitting in a judge's seat I hadn't earned. I tried the top drawers. Unlocked. Stationary charity gala invitations, tax documents for the foundation. Boring. Innocuous. I pulled on the bottom right drawer. Locked. I didn't hunt for a key. I wasn't in the mood for finesse. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a flathead screwdriver from the utility drawer, and returned. I jammed the metal tip into the gap between the wood and the lock mechanism and shoved. The wood splintered with a sharp crack that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I wrenched the drawer open. I expected to find burner phones. I expected love letters from Chase Rivers, or hotel receipts, or a secret bank account where she was funneling my money. Instead, there was a single thick manila envelope. No markings. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly. I undid the string tie and dumped the contents onto the desk. Photographs slid out. I stared at them, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. They weren't photos of Victoria and Chase. They were photos of me. Me 5 years ago. Me standing outside a boutique hotel in the West Loop. Me sitting at a corner table in a dimly lit bar, my hand resting on the thigh of a woman with dark curly hair. Elena. The name hit me like a physical blow. Elena Vasquez. She was a junior associate at my firm, brilliant young and looking at me with hero worship that I had mistaken for love. We had an affair that lasted 3 months. It was a cliché, the powerful boss and the aspiring creative. I had ended it when I got bored, when the risk began to outweigh the thrill. I thought I had been discreet. I thought I had buried it. I frantically shuffled through the papers. There were emails, printed transcripts of texts I had sent her. Meet me at the Palmer House. Room 412. But then the documents changed. There was a legal agreement, a non-disclosure agreement drafted not by my lawyers but by a firm I didn't recognize. It was signed by Elena Vasquez. And there was a bank transfer record. A wire transfer for $250,000. The source account wasn't mine. It was from a trust fund Victoria had inherited from her grandmother. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. The room spun. Victoria hadn't just known. She had cleaned it up. While I was sleeping in our bed, lying to her face, telling her I was working late on the Spire project, she was meeting with lawyers. She was paying off my mistress. She was buying Elena's silence, ensuring that the scandal didn't destroy Sullivan Construction, just as we were bidding for the city's biggest contract. I looked at the date on the NDA. It was signed 2 days before our 5th wedding anniversary. I remembered that anniversary. We had gone to Paris. I had bought her a necklace. She had been quiet, a little distant, but I had attributed it to jet lag. I had toasted to our love, to our honesty. And she had sat there sipping her wine, knowing that she had just spent $250,000 to save my reputation. She hadn't left me then. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't thrown me out. She had swallowed the humiliation, buried the secret in this drawer, and continued to play the part of the perfect wife because my success was more important to her than her own dignity. Chase's words echoed back to me. She's been carrying the weight of your bullshit for 5 years. I looked at the photos of myself. I looked happy in them. Arrogant. Careless. The narrative in my head, the story of the saintly husband and the treacherous wife, disintegrated. I wasn't the victim. I was the liability. And Victoria. She wasn't a traitor. She was a fixer who had finally decided the job wasn't worth the pay anymore. I dropped the photo. My hand brushed against something else in the back of the drawer. A small velvet pouch. I opened it. Inside was a positive pregnancy test, dated 5 years ago, the same week as the NDA, and next to it a receipt from a private clinic. A termination. I stopped breathing. I didn't call her lawyer. I didn't call Brian. I texted her a photo of the clinic receipt. Just the date and the location. Her reply came 3 minutes later. Café Lumière. 4:00 p.m. Don't be late. I arrived at 3:30. I sat in the back corner of the French Café, a place where we used to have brunch on Sundays in the early years, before business brunch became a networking opportunity. The marble table felt cold under my elbows. I kept my hands folded to hide the tremor. When Victoria walked in, the air in the room seemed to shift. She wasn't wearing the scandalous emerald dress, nor the sharp business suits she wore to run my foundation. She was wearing jeans and a white cashmere sweater. Her hair was loose. She looked 5 years younger. She looked lighter. She sat down opposite me without saying a word. She ordered a black tea. She didn't look at the envelope I had placed on the table between us. "You broke the lock," she said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. You kept the file," I countered, my voice sounding scrapped and raw. "Why insurance?" she said simply. "Or maybe a reminder. I used to take it out sometimes just to remember why I felt so cold in our bed." I pushed the envelope toward her. "I saw the NDA. I saw the money you sent Elena. But the other paper—" "Victoria, why?" Her eyes, usually so warm, were flat. "The pregnancy, yes," I choked out. That was my child, too." "No, Michael." She shook her head slowly. "That was a trap. I found out about Elena and the baby in the same week. You were in New York closing the tower deal. You didn't call me for 3 days. I realized then that if I had that baby, I would be tied to you forever. I would be the wife waiting at home with a stroller while you were out conquering the world and sleeping with assistants." "I would have changed," I whispered the lie, tasting like ash in my mouth. "You wouldn't," she said. "You would have bought me a bigger house. You would have hired nannies. You would have thrown money at the problem like you do with everything else." I terminated the pregnancy because I refused to bring a child into a house built on lies. I saved the company name, I paid off your mistress, and I made sure you stayed the hero. That was my sacrifice. "And Chase," I asked the name, feeling like a curse. "Was he your reward?" Victoria laughed softly, a sound devoid of humor. Chase is a prop, Michael. Just like I was a prop to you." The realization hit me harder than the baseball player ever could. "You didn't love him. I don't even like him," she admitted, taking a sip of her tea. "He's arrogant and simple, but he's loud. He's visible, and he was willing." "You used him," I said. "I mirrored you," she corrected, leaning forward, her gaze piercing me. "You humiliated me privately with a nobody, so I humiliated you publicly with a somebody. I wanted you to feel what it's like to stand in a room full of people and know that you are the punchline. I wanted you to feel that specific, suffocating shame of being replaced. You destroyed everything," I said, tears finally pricking my eyes. 10 years of work, my reputation, over a grudge. "It wasn't a grudge, it was an exit strategy," she said, placing her cup down. "I couldn't just leave you, Michael. You're too powerful. You would have spun the story. You would have made me the crazy ex-wife. You would have suffocated me with lawyers. I had to blow it up. I had to make sure there was nothing left to save." She stood up. She picked up her purse, leaving the tea unfinished. "The papers will be sent to your office tomorrow," she said. "Uncontested divorce. I don't want the money. I don't want the penthouse. I just want my name back." "Victoria," I pleaded, standing up, not caring that people were watching. "We can fix this. I know I messed up. I know I owe you. Let me make it right." She stopped and looked back at me, her expression softening into something that looked heartbreakingly like pity. "You can't fix a structure when the foundation is rotten, Michael. You taught me that." She turned and walked out the door into the autumn sunlight. I stood there, surrounded by the murmur of polite conversation, realizing that for the first time in 10 years, she wasn't walking away to make a dramatic exit. She was just walking away. And I was the one left holding the bill. The 42nd floor of the Sterling building was usually the place where I felt most like a guh. From here, the people on the sidewalk were ants, the traffic was a silent river of light, and the city was just a blueprint waiting for my approval. But today, the office felt less like a throne room and more like a sterile isolation chamber. Brian Cooper sat across from my mahogany desk, his energy manic and sharp. He was laying out photographs and documents like a general presenting a battle plan. "We have him, Michael," Brian said, tapping a glossy photo of Chase Rivers leaving a high-stakes poker room at 3 a.m. "We have the gambling debts. We have a source ready to go on record about his recreational drug use during the playoffs. If we leak this to the Tribune tomorrow, the Cubs will cut him before the season opener. His sponsors will drop him by noon. He'll be finished." Brian looked up at me expecting a nod, expecting the green light. This was what I paid him for, to clean up my messes and bury my enemies. A week ago, destroying Chase Rivers would have been the highlight of my quarter. I would have relished the power trip. The knowledge that I could snap a professional athlete's career like a dry twig. I looked at the photos. Chase looked sweaty, desperate young. "Do it," the old Michael would have said. But the voice of Victoria echoed in the quiet room. "He's just a prop, Michael. If I destroyed the prop, would the audience even care?" Victoria wouldn't. She had made it clear that Chase was nothing more than a blunt instrument she used to break the glass of our marriage. Breaking the instrument now wouldn't put the glass back together. It wouldn't bring her back. It wouldn't erase the memory of the abortion clinic receipt I had found in her drawer. "No," I said. Brian froze. "Excuse me. Kill the story," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "Let him play. Let him keep his contracts. Michael, he humiliated you." Brian argued, his face flushing. "The public wants blood. If you show mercy, you look weak." "I don't care about the public, Brian," I said quietly. "And I don't care about him. He doesn't matter." Brian stared at me for a long moment, then slowly gathered the photos. He looked disappointed, like a child told to put away a dangerous toy. "Fine. But there is one more thing." He slid a thin manila envelope across the desk. "These arrived via courier an hour ago, from her lawyers." I stared at the envelope. It was too thin. A divorce settlement involving an estate of my size should have been a phone book. It should have been a war of attrition over real estate stocks, art, and alimony. I opened it. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Uncontested. I flipped to the asset division section. It was blank. There was a single addendum attached. Victoria was requesting nothing. No alimony, no share of Sullivan Construction, no claim on the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, or the investment portfolio. She was walking away with exactly what she had brought into the marriage, her trust fund and her maiden name. It was the most violent thing she could have done. If she had asked for half, it would have meant I had built something she valued. It would have meant she felt entitled to compensation for her time. It would have been a transaction, and I understood transactions. I could have fought her for every cent, and in that fight, we would have still been connected. We would have still been husband and wife locked in combat. But this was total erasure. She was saying that 10 years of my life, my success, my billions, it was all worth zero to her. She was willing to walk away empty-handed just to get away from me. "She's refusing the settlement." Brian noted, his voice confused. "Legally, this is a dream scenario. You keep everything." "I keep nothing," I whispered. I looked around the office. The awards on the shelves, the architectural models of skyscrapers I had built, the framed magazine covers. It was all still there. I had won. I had kept my fortune. I had kept my company. I had even spared my enemy. But as I picked up my Mont Blanc pen to sign the line that would end my marriage, I realized that I was the poorest man in Chicago. I signed my name, Michael Sullivan. The ink looked black and permanent. Send it back, I told Brian, closing the file. And get out. When the door clicked shut, I turned my chair to face the window. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the grid. I watched the lights flicker on one by one in the buildings I had built. Millions of people down there going home to dinner, to arguments, to messy, imperfect lives. I sat in the silence of my tower, perfectly successful, perfectly rich, and perfectly alone. 6 weeks. That was how long it took for the city of Chicago to forget. The scandal that had felt like an apocalypse was now just yesterday's news. The tabloids had moved on to a politician's affair in Springfield. Chase Rivers had been traded to a team in California, not because I destroyed him, but because the Cubs wanted a fresh start. And Victoria, she had simply vanished. There were no paparazzi photos of her, no social media updates. She had dissolved into the ether, reclaiming the anonymity she had told me was her only goal. I stood in my office at 8 p.m. on a Friday. The staff had gone home hours ago. The cleaning crew was vacuuming the hallway, a low rhythmic hum that seeped through the heavy oak doors. On my desk lay the final decree of divorce, stamped and filed. It was just a piece of paper. It weighed less than an ounce, yet it had severed a decade of history. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The view was magnificent. The city was a sprawling grid of amber and white light, a testament to human will and engineering. I could point to 5 different buildings in this skyline that I had built. I could see the steel skeletons of 2 more rising in the West Loop. I was the king of Chicago. My stock price was up 12%. My reputation as the stoic, wronged husband had actually polled well with female voters in the demographic studies Brian insisted on running. I had won. I had survived the scandal, kept my fortune, and maintained my throne. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark glass, I didn't see a king. I saw a man in an empty tower. My left hand felt heavy. I raised it, looking at the platinum band that still encircled my finger. For 10 years, I had worn this ring as a prop. It was a signal to clients that I was stable. It was a shield against unwanted advances. It was a part of the costume, the suit, the watch, the ring. I had worn it while I bought jewelry for Elena. I had worn it while I prioritized board meetings over anniversary dinners. I had worn it while Victoria slowly suffocated in the vacuum of my ambition. She hadn't left me because of Chase Rivers. She hadn't left me because she stopped loving me. She left because she finally respected herself enough to stop being an accessory to my ego. I gripped the ring with my right hand. It was tight. It resisted clinging to the skin as if it had fused with the bone. I twisted it, the metal cool against my fingertips. With a sharp tug, it slid over the knuckle. The sensation was immediate. My finger felt naked. There was a pale band of skin where the metal had been a ghost of the marriage that would take months to fade. But the weight, the crushing, invisible weight of the lie I had been living was gone. I walked back to my desk. The glass surface was pristine, reflecting the recessed lighting above. I held the ring over the desk for a moment. It was a perfect circle, a symbol of eternity, a symbol of a promise I had made and broken 1,000 times in 1,000 small ways before the final collapse. I let it drop, clink. The sound was sharp and final in the silent office. The ring spun for a second, a blurring halo of platinum, before settling still on the cold glass. I didn't pick it up. I didn't put it in the drawer. I left it there, right in the center of the desk, where the morning sun would hit it. I grabbed my coat. I didn't look back. I walked out of the office past the silent reception desk and toward the elevator. The doors slid open with a soft chime. As the elevator descended, taking me down to the street level, down to the ground where real people lived and struggled and felt things, I finally understood the architecture of my own ruin. I built skyscrapers that scraped the clouds, but I never noticed the foundation of my own home was rotting until the roof caved in.
What a heavy ending. This story wasn't really about cheating, it was about the cost of ego. Michael built skyscrapers, but he couldn't build a home because he forgot that trust is the foundation. Sometimes the person we hurt the most is the one standing right beside us, protecting our secrets. I want to hear from you. Was Victoria's public revenge justified after what Michael did to her years ago? Or did two wrongs just make everything worse? Let me know in the comments if this story made you think. Please leave a like and share it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Next.